This crowd rises to its feet. Toro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland went to the lane, locked to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including FanDuel Sports Network without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. We are getting closer and closer to another NBA season. The offseason is just flying by. Not as quick as I'd like. I'd like to get a little Cavs back in my life, but it is still trucking along nonetheless. We are going to continue our offseason preview by talking about the Eastern Conference today, and to help me do so is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Brother, I'm about to challenge that assertion that the offseason's moving fast. Feels like it's been the slowest one yet. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too hyped. I'm too ready for Cavs basketball. I'm too ready. I think my continued loss of interest in the NFL is really biting into my into my vibes with regards to sports. Because I just want basketball back now, Justin.
I was going to say, your issue is you are not tapping into Canadian sports. You're just not doing it enough. We're on week 10 of the CFL season. I got CBL playoffs coming up this week. Come on, buddy. You got to tap into some
How are the
Canadian
Bears
sports
doing?
here.
How are the Sea Bears doing?
Western Conference Final, August 22nd. Free to watch on CBL Plus. Make sure y'all are tapping in. But we're not here to talk about my beloved Sea Bears. We are here joined by one of my favorite national podcasters, Dan Favale of the Hardwood Knocks podcast, also a Bleacher Report. How the hell are you doing, buddy?
I'm a little disappointed that we're not going to be talking about the Sea Bears, who I have no knowledge of, but it would have been fun to learn about and fire off takes anyway. But other than that, I'm excited. Thank you guys so much for having me.
My favorite thing is anytime someone that doesn't follow the CBL at all, looks at a roster, it is just like the ultimate guys naming dudes of G League, some fringe NBA experience. It is just a really, really fun collection of players. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy having them in my life very much so.
Well, Justin, I'm surprised that I liked your framing. If you're one of those folks who doesn't know a lot about the CEBL among our listener base, as though it's not the wild majority.
No. Everybody's definitely tapped in. There's more than you think, Carter. Trust me on that. But we're not
Dozens
here.
Of us. Dozens.
We are not here to talk about that today. We are here to talk about the Eastern Conference. Definitely one of the weirder off seasons that I can remember, just because. Dan, every year Carter and I have kind of done interview podcasts, talked to other kind of teams that we see within the Cavs tier, trying to see how we measure up to all these teams. And so much of our focus has been on overcoming the Boston Celtics, finding a way to beat them. The focus certainly would have been on how do we stack up against the Indiana Pacers? How much was injury? How much was, things that they can correct throughout the offseason? And both of those questions aren't really on the forefront of our minds because of the injuries to Jason Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton, and then everything that's kind of happened to the Boston Celtics. So before we
even the Pacers, even Turner going away, it's not just the injuries. Both teams have lost major parts of their core.
Yeah, it just that understanding that an Achilles is going to cost you the next season, so you kind of have to go into future planning, but. Before we talk about some of the other teams in the Eastern Conference and kind of who you view as being kind of within that Cavs tier or have a puncher's chance against them, what's kind of your general sense of the Cavs offseason? I was listening back to your kind of re-review of your 2024 offseason, which I really enjoyed, and you were correct last offseason. So I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts on how you think they've done so far in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, for a team that entered the offseason with just a limited amount of tools or things that you thought they could have done, I thought they did like everything they've done has been good. I really like the Lonzo Ball trade. I think they got the better player on a team-friendlier contract, and that's just huge. He's going to open up a lot for them with their shooting. He will get them into some transition stuff. I think can still be a really valuable defender. The playing time issue, how many minutes can he play? That's certainly something to tackle, but missing Ty Jerome, he's kind of a different type of ball handler than Alonzo or even a Sam Merrill. I really like the Sam Merrill contract. I had to dig into some more film for him for something I was working on, and I just think that he's kind of like, that's one of the guys where Cavs fans know him, and I think people who really follow the NBA closely know him, but like that feels like someone who could pop for a lot of people next year. Just not what he only does for them on offense, but he's proved a little bit tougher for them on defense as well. And so you just look at this Cleveland roster right down to getting Larry Nance Jr. back. If they aren't any semblance of healthy, I don't know how they're not the favorites to come out of the East. I know there's like this groundswell for the Knicks because they're the Knicks and they certainly belong in that conversation, but I actually kind of feel like the Cavs should be the clear-cut favorites to come out of the East, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on this podcast right now.
That's nice to hear, and I do think like there is certainly the case for this team. They were awesome all last year. They had some really untimely injuries and played a tough stylistic matchup in Indy and went by the wayside. Why do you have them clearly ahead of the Knicks at this point? I'm generally with you, but I would love to hear like a specific like why you would put them in front.
Well, I think the Pacers kind of proved it last year, and even the Cavs to some extent, that depth is not just about surviving the regular season anymore, even though that's a hugely important part of it. You want to have different buttons to push during the playoffs. The Indiana Pacers were able to do that 10 times over. The Thunder were able to do that 10 times over. And I look at the Cavs as, yeah, you might still have some questions about how do the two small guards hold up? Who do you want to play in certain situations to round out like that fifth spot in their core four lineup? They have so many different options to do that with now. When you look at Hunter and Strus and Dean Wade, if you want to play Lonzo Ball, there's a bunch of different looks they can roll out. When you're looking at those secondary units, they can play a bunch of different styles. And I think that serves them well when breaking down individual matchups in the playoffs. Yes, over the course of a series, that singular matchup matters the most. But to get to a certain point in the season, you want to be able to roll out a whole bunch of different stuff. And also if you're faced with something like we saw them against the Pacers, where they seem kind of flummoxed against Indiana's defensive approach at points, it feels like, one, you've now seen that, but two, you're better built, especially if DeAndre Hunter gets to go through a training camp with you, to kind of adjust to that in more different ways than we even saw during that postseason series.
Yeah, for me, the thing that is going to make me nervous for the entirety of next season is health, right? Like I firmly do believe that if the Cavs were healthy, I think their margin for error against the Pacers would have been a whole lot wider. You look at, not only just the obvious ones, Darius Garland going through the toe injury, Evan Mobley missing a game, DeAndre Hunter, breaking or dislocating his thumb on a shooting hand. But Donovan Mitchell dealing with that calf strain, and the fact that, this is 2 years in a row where health has been a major kind of story for the Cavs in the playoffs. That's what makes me nervous, right? Like, and maybe that is a part of kind of the small guards thing that doesn't get talked about enough. But I agree with you. I think from a talent standpoint, from a how good this roster is standpoint, they should be the favorites, right? Like they swept the Knicks last season. I do think that the Knicks got a little bit better and a little bit deeper. But that wasn't a team that the Cavs had any trouble with, right? Even thinking back to that late season matchup at Madison Square Garden where Donovan Mitchell was sad and Garland kind of took over and Jalen Tyson was playing a significant role. Like the Cavs just didn't have a lot of issues with them. Whereas a team like Indiana, even though, I believe that they could have beat them if healthy, there were at least some signs in the regular season where it was, hey, you know what? They do struggle sometimes against this full court press, or, they are in a bit of a scramble when it comes to Indiana's ability to generate offense from all over the court.
Might I throw out a little bit of a devil's advocate point here, though? Because sure. Part of why I think you and I felt so good against the Knicks last year, had they, landed in that matchup in some form or fashion, was that we kind of felt like they had sacrificed a bit of their identity on the offensive glass in terms of their ruggedness, in terms of their ability to get downhill and get, attack the rim for a lot of kind of side-to-side play. A lot of, Cat is not exactly known as a bastion of physicality, but they won pretty ugly in the playoffs still. Like that series against Detroit was super physical and rough. They were able to, I mean, you have to point the finger at Boston a little bit for leaning so far into a strategy that clearly wasn't bearing fruit. But they were able to clearly have control of that series well before Tatum injured his Achilles. And I guess I'll ask Dan first. Do you think there's a world in which we're kind of still operating as though the Knicks were what we perceived them to be going into the playoffs because of that injury, and maybe they've earned a little bit more?
Maybe, but I also think that the counterpoint to that would be one, to call them deeper. They are deeper, but we're Jordan Clarkson and Gershon Yabusele getting a lot of mileage, right?
Yeah, the Clarkson one doesn't do much for me.
Right. So there's that. And I am an alarmist. So that's a character flaw. But when you look at the level of availability they got from Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, and OG Anunoby last year, with OG Anunoby specifically, there's no way that's happening again. And the other part of that is when you look at Mikal Bridges and Josh Hart and their durability over the past few years, the alarmist in me says, well, they're just due. And when you look at a team like the Cavs and you say, they're going to get a postseason series where more than half of their core four are healthy, right? I'm just assuming that will eventually happen. And I think what really does kind of edge the Cavs out for me, they have Evan Mobley, and there's no other team in the East towards the top, with the exception of Orlando, where it's just, oh, they have this star who is still getting better. And the Knicks have kind of maxed out everything they've done. They might be able to get to lineups where that offensive rebounding identity comes back, but you will make concessions in all these other areas, and you risk marginalizing Karl-Anthony Towns or Josh Hart or both of them in that. So I'm interested to see if Mike Brown can do some more creative things with them. I think the offense will look a lot different. And that's not to say they're a bad team. I think they're probably pretty clearly the second best team in the East. You could probably talk to me into Orlando, I think. But the Cavs are they're just different. And the Evan Mobley, between the depth and just having that Evan Mobley swing piece of, he could have made first team All NBA last year. I think I had him on my first team ballot. And so to just have that guy and say, oh, well, he still has room to get better. That's just something no other team in the East has right now.
It's always going to come down to Evan Mobley. Carter and I have been beating this drum for years, right? When people say, it's what you're able to do defensively to a smaller guard backcourt, that doesn't translate to the playoffs. The only examples where that has translated to the playoffs is when you have someone in the front court that's able to initiate offense, that's able to take that pressure off of those guards and in turn reopen them up, right? So I think the story of this season for people that are looking for something from the regular season is Evan Mobley's development. How frequently they involve him in the offense, what that offensive evolution looks like. Do they go away from it in certain situations? Do they go away from it in the clutch? All those little nuances that you can only really get a feel for if you're watching 82 games is exactly what you should be tapping into. But I think Carter's right. I think sometimes I can be a little narrow-sighted when it comes to stuff like that, looking at the Knicks in the regular season. I do think that they showed their experience in the playoffs, and that's not something that you should take for granted. I do think a series against Detroit is going to look ugly no matter what. I will continue to say they were probably one or two calls away from losing that series in the first round, calls that probably should have gone Detroit's way. And then Boston, Porzingis couldn't breathe. Holiday wasn't right.
There's a lot of context here. I'm not going to pretend it's not there.
Brown was on a torn meniscus, right? So, I'm going to be dismissive of them, and I think it's important. I think it's important that you bring that up, and I think it's important that I'm dismissive of them because the rivalry is back. We were worried that the Knicks weren't going to be able to get into this mix again, Carter, and I'm very, very happy because we need to have some fights with the Knicks film school guys. This is going to be the story of the season. I'm very excited for it, but speaking of that potential rivalry, we did get some reporting, I guess a schedule leak. The full schedule will be out soon. Might even be out by the time you guys are listening to this podcast. But it does seem like the Knicks and Cavs are going to be playing on Christmas Day. I'm very excited for the Cavs to get a Christmas game. Dan, I'm curious. I noticed that the Cavs and Knicks are the only East teams playing on Christmas. Do you think that there were other East teams deserving of this showcase, or did the NBA get it right on this one?
I mean, they probably got it right, but it's just a bummer that you could look at a team like the Bucks that has Giannis or Philly, where if Joel Embiid's healthy, but you can't make any of those assumptions right now. So it seems like they played it safe. And if you're a real sicko, I think you could point and be like, man, it really would have been cool to see Detroit or Orlando or even Atlanta with all the moves they made work it into that schedule. But when you really start to go through it and look at who would have needed to be snubbed in the Western Conference, and there are people already debating over who was snubbed in the Western Conference. I get it. I actually think, even though it's only 4 teams, isn't it a little bit more egregious that we just don't even have an Eastern Conference team on opening night?
We don't.
You're right. We don't.
I'm not a famous schedule watcher. Who's on opening night?
Lakers. Is it Lakers, Warriors, and Nuggets? Who's the other? Is it Wolves? Did I forget that one?
Yeah, I think it was Wolves.
Wow.
So it's 4 West teams, and that's just, again, you get it, but like you mentioned, the Cavs and the Knicks are like, I guess the East, like one great hope to have 2 teams that you want to see on every occasion. I'd be in favor. I know this isn't logistically feasible for people who have real jobs, unlike myself, but like, can we get a 3rd game that's super earlier or something? It just feels weird to not have a single. It just doesn't it feel like we're just admitting, oh yeah, this conference is completely washed. That's that's the read I have on it.
I think the NBA needs to recognize that the heyday, the glory days of NBA ratings involved heavy doses of the Cavs. And if you want, with all the discussion about ratings, if you want those ratings, you got to put the Cavs on TV. So I agree with you there. It's funny that you mentioned, like, as sickos, you might mention Detroit and Orlando. I am very clearly that sicko because I wasn't even thinking about the Bucks and I wasn't thinking about the Sixers. I'm like, man, Orlando's probably going to be pretty good with Desmond Bane here, and Detroit's going to take a step forward. Cade Cunningham, I like some of their moves. Ivy's going to be back. Those teams
really have to earn your way into Christmas, though. Like that is one of the true, like, unless you're a glamour market, like a true blue glamour market, like just being a pretty good team is not going to cut it. You have to be like considered a title contender with someone of interest. You know, like the NBA only gets one Christmas
evidenced by
year.
the Cavs taking this long to get back to Christmas.
Well, and there's probably even something too. Okay, the Celtics are entering like coupon clipping mode, and they got bounced from this rotation. So it's proof that it's not just, oh, it's the Boston market that's getting in there, even though
New York got in with some dire rosters in years past.
Well, I'm saying for this year specifically, you just get to point to it and say, okay, they cut Boston. They only have 2 East teams on Christmas, but at least it's not like, oh, Boston, where they'll probably rest Derek White and Jaylen Brown, and we're going to watch Chris Boucher play 47 minutes on Christmas.
Well, we might be watching him average 47 with that big man rotation.
As a Chris Boucher apologist, I'm going to very much enjoy that. But overall, yeah, Boston's front court rotation is looking pretty rough at the moment.
Yeah. Starting power forward Sam Hauser, come on down.
we were big Boucher guys. We liked him as a depth piece for the Cavs, and yeah, definitely see him playing a lot of minutes for Boston next season. So it does seem though, like from your comments about the Cavs and the Knicks, you kind of have them in a tier above the rest of the Eastern Conference. Do you have them in the same tier? I know you have the Cavs as the favorite, but do you kind of view them within that same tier as kind of the tier 1 of the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I do think they're in the same tier. I probably have like a little bit more separation within the tier than maybe others would have. And I'm sure there are other people that have the Knicks ahead of the Cavs. But I think they're both right there because if you look at the East, it's kind of who are you going to pencil in for 50-plus victories next year, where you feel like almost 50 wins is like their floor. And it's just the Cavs and the Knicks, and then it feels like there's everybody else. And it's like to what Carter said before, I think you could talk yourself into certain other teams being close, but you do have to earn it. There needs to be a proof of concept in Orlando now that it seems like they care about offense, or in Atlanta now that it seems like they've surrounded Trae Young with enough defensive versatility. And then just with Philly, I don't know, like my co-host tried to talk me in like the best case outcome for them and what that would look like. And maybe it's tier 1, but I don't know how you even begin to envision that given just the Joel Embiid. Forget about Paul George, just the Joel Embiid of it all.
Yeah, there's just no way to move forward with like any confidence there. The reliability of Joel Embiid and just that team in general, like it's just not there, and it makes it impossible to move forward. And you know what? I really value reliability, Dan. That's why I appreciate Zoom AI Companion, because only you can do your best work. Zoom AI Companion can help you do the rest, like automatically taking notes, answering meeting questions, and helping you respond to your coworker. Available at no additional cost with eligible paid plans. Work happy with Zoom AI Companion. I want to ask though, so if we're calling Cavs and Knicks tier 1 in the Eastern Conference, where does the next group begin, and how many teams do you have in that second tier in the East?
So I think it begins with Orlando, and they might have the case of the team that should be in their own tier as like, okay, do you feel like Atlanta or Milwaukee or Detroit? One of those teams, maybe Philly if they're healthy, or Miami belongs with them. They're the team that I have the toughest time with because I think on paper, when you add Desmond Bane and Tyus Jones to the core that you already have in place, you should be ultra scary, but we just don't know what that offense is still going to look like. So I could see a team like Atlanta or maybe Detroit catching them, but I really think Orlando is going to shock some people. And like if we end up looking back on this season and we see the Cavs have like 61 victories and the Knicks have like 58 or something, like it wouldn't shock me if Orlando has like 55 or something victories like that. And so I think my next tier is actually that team by itself.
I think they kind of have to be. And like I think I would actually argue it is more appropriate to put them in the same tier as the Cavs and Knicks than to put any of the next teams in with them.
I agree with that.
Now, I wouldn't do either of those things. I think they should be in their own tier. But like I just think this is a team that went through their year from hell last year where they kind of got tested. We saw them still, even in their kind of year from hell, impose an identity on a series, which as a Cavs fan, boy, would I like them to do that a little more often and consistently. So the fact that even, at half strength, they've been able to do that. They have shored up their structural weaknesses, both in terms of adding additional play initiators and organizers and shooters in Jones and Bane. And it really just I feel like the only reason to be skeptical of the Magic is you either don't believe in their coach, who like I think should be high on, whatever power rankings of coaches who I don't think will start next season with their team. Just not even it because it's Jamal Mosley's fault. It feels like if they don't go anywhere, if they don't get to the conference finals this year, someone's probably going to pay with how expensive this team is going to be. But you either don't believe in their coach or you think Paolo and Franz are one tier lower as stars than fans do. And like Justin, I know, is somewhat skeptical of Franz. I'm a big Franz guy. And I'm a big Paolo guy. So like if I believe that Paolo is like a 2B tier 1 star in the league, I think Franz is going to be a legit tier 2 kind of sidekick in the league. And I think they have good depth and interesting pieces and a good identity. Like, how can I not say they're like a contender to win the East?
Yeah, I don't trust Franz Wagner. Like the jump shot is just, we kind of now have evidence that it's not the best thing. And he's still been super effective without it. But now that you're probably going to scale down his usage because Bane is there, you have Tyus Jones getting him the ball. Like this is kind of a make or break season for him with that, because he becomes severely limiting as a player if he doesn't have a consistent jump shot. And I think there's a lot of data that shows the lineups with Franz are better when he doesn't have Paolo than Paolo without Franz. The context of the units they're going up against matters. And I think that Paolo is probably one of the players in the league is going to singularly benefit the most from just having actual spacing around him, which he just never has. And so I could see Franz being a tier 2 star, but I am still skeptical of him. And you mentioned the Jamal Mosley stuff. I want to be clear. I don't think all of this is his fault. But like this isn't a team that has played fast enough in the past. He's also shown a reluctance to like not try out guys who are more offense first in service of the defense. And so that makes me wonder, are we gonna be sitting here and Tyus Jones is kind of glued to the bench at points when he shouldn't be? And so I still have some questions about the shooting and the offense, which is why I don't think I could agree with, oh, they're closer to the Cavs and the Knicks than being a tier below. But I think that also might say how much we're probably at the point of the offseason where we've all had too much time to think. And I've thought a lot about the Atlanta Hawks. And so like I'm kind of sipping the Atlanta Hawks juice right now. So it feels like I'd be
wrong
more inclined to move them
podcast
into a
for
Hawks
that.
tier.
But no, we'll get to that very shortly for sure. And like my big thing, it's not so much not believing in Franz and Paolo. It's whether or not you buy into them being able to be the lead initiator for a team, because Desmond Bane is able to run some offense, but I really thought that this team would settle in if they had a true point guard. I thought if you had someone that was really out there organizing, Suggs is a perfect fit next to a guy like that, a defense first combo guard. The shots come along a fair bit there. I just think if you're relying on Paolo and Franz to initiate consistently and kind of be the lead initiators, I just think that there is a ceiling to that. And I think it's even more kind of tenuous with Franz being the better playmaker of the two. And when you don't have that outside shot as a playmaker, I think it just puts a lot of burden on you in terms of what you're able to do, particularly in the postseason. I think this is going to be a really, really great regular season team. I think this is a team that, if they get hot, if, they get the right breaks, I think they could beat the Cavs in a matchup. Like, I think they could beat us in a playoff series, particularly if the Cavs aren't playing at their best. But I just think kind of from a structural standpoint, that's where my concerns come in with the Orlando Magic. And it has more to do with that than, me thinking that Franz might just be Denny Avdia with, a few extra steps.
I want to ask about Bane a little bit with them. I'm interested what you think about this, Dan, because I remember those grit and grind Grizzlies, and it's a completely different archetype of a team. So, grain of salt with that comp. But I remember year after year after year, there was that if they could just get a shooter on the wing, and and they tried guys who could kind of shoot. They had the Chandler Parsons thing, they had the Tayshaun Prince thing. And none of those guys are Desmond Bane, right? Who is like a grade A, capital S shooter. However, sometimes I wonder if how much one shooter in a morass of non-shooting can impact things. Like what's more valuable, having 4 shooters on the floor and going to 5, or having 0 shooters on the floor and going to 1? And I just wonder if the spacing will be less impactful than people maybe think, just because it's still just one guy out there and you're going to just ignore the other people 3% harder. Do you think there's something to that?
There might be. It feels like there, to some extent, which I don't think is unfair, betting on the continued internal development of Paolo and Franz and even Jalen Suggs. And Jalen Suggs, I know he kind of had a down year before his injury offensively last year, but he's kind of earned my trust as a shooter, especially on set shots. And I think even with Franz Wagner, as someone who I still have questions with when it comes to the jumper, if you're going to just give him a lot more open space, especially if he's on the court with Bane and Paolo at the same time, that should increase. There's just going to be a nudge up in his efficiency. And so you're forcing, what I think they're doing is, because you said Desmond Bane's this caps lock shooter where it's on the ball, it's off the ball, he can get in motion, you are forcing, it might just be one guy, but you're forcing defenses to make a series of tougher decisions that will benefit, even if it's not, oh, look, the Magic are shooting 37% from 3. It's, oh, Paolo's true shooting percentage is well above the league average. Oh, Franz is more wide open threes than he has in his career. So I think stuff like that will be the things to monitor, but they are still betting on, we have the internal talent in place to where we just needed to add one, you count Tyus Jones, 2 pieces, and we're going to be set. But you could also make the case that, all right, if the 3 is not still falling and defenses are still collapsing, or they're giving these guys all this room and it's not working, you could certainly say that there's a chance. I guess I'm a big enough believer in a lot of the other supplementary guys, or I shouldn't say supplementary, but Paolo, Franz, even Wendell Carter Jr. if he's going to be healthy.
Big Wendell Carter Jr. guy.
Rough season for him last year, but and their center rotations weirdly shaky. You have Isaac, and then Wagner, Mo's coming back from that injury. Isaac can play
also
4 minutes
17
a game.
people for
so
some
many
reason.
centers.
Right.
When people are like, man, can the Lakers find a center? I'm like, call Orlando. They've got all of them.
Yeah. It's kind of like a quarterback competition where you have 5. It's there's, hey, Carter making that face. I will say this. It is really nice that the Browns actually have a quarterback that I want to root for in Shadur. I am enjoying that. But normally, the old adage is if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have 1. I think the same thing goes when you have 5.
We talking about the NFL on this podcast, Justin?
A little bit. I thought it was a good analogy. I thought there was a little bit of a connection to having 17 centers and not sure which ones are going to step up.
Hey, you lost me with I have no idea who the Browns quarterback is. That's how far removed I am from consuming.
Neither do they. Anyways, I think the other thing with the Orlando Magic is they have a lot of opportunities for internal development, right? I think you're correct pointing out Suggs, Paolo, and Franz, and Wendell Carter Jr., but even someone like Anthony Black, I think, is capable of taking a step forward. So anytime you have a team that has a core that young, I think it's foolish to assume that they're going to be stagnant from a development standpoint. I think that's true for us, and you kind of have to think the same for Orlando. Now, if Orlando's in tier 2 on their own, I have a guess who's going to be the top of your tier 3. But let's hear what you have in terms of a third tier in the Eastern Conference.
So I have Atlanta, Detroit, and then Milwaukee in that. That would probably be my specific order. As I said, I'm really high on the Hawks and the talent they've put around Trae Young. They probably have some shaky frontline stuff with Porzingis, and then there's Jalen Johnson's health, but the defensive versatility around them, I think they have just enough shooting. The secondary ball handling might still be questionable unless you trust Luke Kennard or Kobe Buffkin, but this is a team that I think finally understands how to build around Trae Young. I guess from like an off-court perspective, though, I would be curious if he does go into the season without an extension and you're dealing with that in the backdrop. Does that impact this team at all in the coverage they get? But man, they made a lot of really good moves, and it wasn't just about fleecing the Pelicans over the offseason.
Did you think that the Hawks had the best offseason in terms of teams?
It's probably them, or maybe it's, I mean, Houston getting KD is big. Everyone likes what the Clippers did. I like it, but I do wonder if they maybe compromised like their identity from last year. We fell in love with them and they were great because of their defense. They needed more offense, and now they've leaned kind of really far into it. I think you could say, yeah, maybe Atlanta did have the best offseason. I think they're certainly in contention with like the 3 or 4 teams for that honor.
Well, I think it's very fair to say that they are up there just because they are a team where you kind of looked at their roster and you saw 4 or 5 guys you liked, and then it was like, oh, they're playing, Keaton Wallace and Kobe Buffkin minutes that matter, and like teams that are trying to be more than, what the Hawks were last year don't play those guys, and like they've been able to like add quite a bit of just playable depth, or in some cases like push their fringe playable depth that were playing big minutes into small roles. Like Moguet, playoff starter, not super into that. Moguet is like your 3rd or 4th big, maybe even your 5th big in some cases. Like that's a pretty helpful player. Like, so I think there's a lot of utility there. The one thing I'm interested in with them is like, is there enough on-ball juice? It does kind of ask Jalen, DeAndre Hunter was a lot of their scoring punch last year. Whether you like DeAndre or are just okay on him, like he was a very useful piece. Like when it's not Trae, you're going to be needing Daniels and Jalen Johnson to initiate 90% of your offense. Like, is that enough for you in terms of dynamicism on ball?
No, in a vacuum, but I think that they have more ways to counter it that they didn't last year. And I think Jalen Johnson's a really good passer. And so now you're putting him at points, we're assuming, next to a floor spacing 5 in Porzingis. That opens his game a lot. I think that gives Dyson Daniels more room to drive. I'm also wondering if you have minutes with Porzingis at the 5, can you use Daniels as the screener and maybe have him do some facilitating out of the short roll? I think a lot of it comes down to how healthy will Porzingis be, because I think he's the skeleton key that just unlocks so many things to use everyone in different ways. And then what does Jalen Johnson look like as a shooter? He's kind of just floated around these percentages where you believe just enough, but you'd like to see him nudge it up. And I think the bigger thing too, Trae Young to me has probably become a little bit underrated the way people talk about him. And I know he was dealing with Achilles stuff last year, but like the efficiency from 3 is something I'm watching. Like he will still create looks at the rim and draw attention, and he can get to that floater, but you need him to just be a more efficient scorer overall, because that puts even more pressure on opposing defenses. But I think the question would be, who is your second best ball handler / playmaker on this team? You have to feel comfortable with Jalen Johnson being the answer, because if you start getting into Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Luke Kennard, Kobe, like you've then already lost that battle. And so I think it really comes down to what is Jalen Johnson going to look like and how healthy can he be for this year, with, again, a few of those other questions baked in as well.
Feels like Okongwu is another swing guy for them, where it's like, I love Okongwu. I've loved him since he was a prospect. And I just think he does a lot of good in-between stuff. Feels like he might have to be a little bit more than the nice guy who fills some gaps for them, right? Especially on the defensive end. Yeah,
for sure. And I'd be worried about how some of the rebounding for them can look in the front court, whether or not you're going to play him with another big. There was some lineup data with him as the lone big where the rebounding was really good, but there was other lineups where it kind of just plummeted. And then you also just, what do they view him as? Like, they've kind of done some exploratory stuff with his jumper on the offensive end. They've done some stuff with him in the short roll on the offensive end, but I don't know that he has a consistent enough role there. Again, the idea of being able to maybe use him, though, with a bigger big in Porzingis who spaces the floor, that's someone else who could really benefit from them. But he's sort of just, I know he's a little bit tinier, but he's almost close to a no-notes guy on defense, at least when you're looking through the lens of versatility, for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I think Jalen Johnson's the biggest X factor there, not only from, like a playmaking and scoring standpoint, but he took a big step forward defensively last year. And I think they're going to need to have those wings that, prove to be solid defenders, really step up and be great defenders, right? And have that proper contain from the perimeter.
Must be noted.
Smiling.
Just must be noted that we're having like a 5-10 minute conversation about the Hawks. We haven't mentioned the number 1 overall pick in the second year. He's
good though.
Like he had a great game against the Cavs.
Let's leave the commentary and the feedback to he's good though. Yeah,
he's good though.
All right, who else do you have in this tier, Dan?
I have Detroit. The Malik Beasley stuff is rough for them because that's another guy with a 3-point shooting volume and efficiency opened so many doors for them. I thought they rebounded kind of nicely on the fly. Duncan Robinson is, I think people kind of tethered him to the contract he signed in Miami, but like quietly over the past 2 years, still hitting his threes, still awful on defense, but can do some things inside the arc now. I think that like they have enough around to insulate him, and Simone Fontecchio wasn't great for them last year. So I think they rebounded nicely there. Karis LeVert, I think you guys know this as well as anyone. He did show some stuff in Cleveland on defense and also as an off-ball scorer. And then he's going to give you that on-ball dynamic should Jaden Ivey maybe not work out according to plan. So I think he can play off Cade Cunningham, off Ivey, or you can use him to run some of the secondary offense. I do wonder, like, what type of a role are they going to need a Marcus Sasser to play, or how do you feel about the Tobias Harris spot? I'm not as confident in their big man situation as everybody else. Isaiah Stewart, I liked in large part because he shot threes and then he stopped shooting threes. And Jalen Duren, I'm just kind of all over the place on. I still don't, 3 years into his career, don't have a feel for what his peak could be. Feels like he has
He's
a
so
lot.
Big, though.
So, I mean, I would kill to have his shoulders. Like, those things are enormous. But just as a rim protector, he can be inconsistent. The offensive involvement can be up and down. But he did have some high moments last year. I just think the biggest thing for them is Ron Holland's jumper was pretty good in summer league. There was that game against the Knicks, did a lot of heavy lifting for his percentages, but if you can trust him from like anywhere outside the restricted area, that's huge. And between him and Asar Thompson just being defensive menaces, you've kept the identity of we can still be a defensive beast. We have an all-NBA cornerstone in Cade Cunningham, who he's another one who continues to get better. And I don't think people talked enough about, sure, the offense was great. The dude improved his rebounding, his defense. They have a lot of players who could end up being two-way guys on this team. So there are deeper rosters with fewer question marks. But I think the upside for this team, when you look at Cunningham, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, like those three specifically, and maybe Jaden Ivey too, coming back from that injury, like I think it's pretty high.
I feel like
I have them above.
You guys,
I have them above Atlanta. I'm a believer in what they're doing. I think they have really good depth. I think there's going to be more continuity for them in comparison to the Hawks, who are going to be integrating new pieces and getting a major piece back in Jalen Johnson from a very severe injury that's probably going to take some time for him to get back to himself. I think at least from a regular season standpoint, I think Detroit's going to be better than them. I don't know if it's going to translate to the playoffs. I think it's important that Detroit did get a taste of the playoffs, but I also just think that Cade Cunningham's the best player of either team. Like I think that I agree with your sentiment that Trae Young is underrated, but I do think Cade Cunningham is a better player at this point.
I don't think that's a crazy controversial take, and I think like the NBA commentariat seems to be split down the middle on these two teams. Like some people really like Detroit still, some people really love what Atlanta did. Where I kind of go with Detroit is just kind of feels like a one step forward to take, or one step back to take a few steps forward season for me. Like Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. were super good for them last year, and I don't think we're ever going to be people they wanted to count on to help them win games at the highest level. And at the end of the day, like they also play styles that like do not fit super well into just like, we'll just do less. Like kind of part of like what made them valuable to Detroit last year was that they did a lot, that they were taking hard shots, making hard shots, being kind of igniters for an offense that could be a little too Cade centric. And I feel like this is going to be a medicine year for them where, you're not going to have that crutch to lean on of Beasley coming off 3 screens and firing a fadeaway 3 and somehow hitting it. But like, I do think they're probably going to grow from it. So like, I feel like I'm lower on them than you, Dan, but like, I think overall they're going to be glad they didn't commit long-term money to those 2 guys. Obviously, the Beasley thing was a happenstance thing with all that crazy stuff going on, but like, I feel like that was a grenade waiting to happen, and I think they dodged an on the court bullet.
It is a little, I won't say it's encouraging if they're worse, but there's something to the progress isn't linear idea. And one of the concerns that I think a lot of people had with the Pistons was, are they going to read too much into not just the regular season success, but as Justin mentioned before, how close they were to beating a team that made it to the conference finals. And even if you bake in what they were prepared to give Malik Beasley, it doesn't seem like they were going to prematurely hit the turbo button. It seems that they're still very clearly invested in developing Ivy, Ron Holland, and Asar Thompson. And to Carter's point, I think that that's the smart call for them, even if in the short term it's going to cost them some wins or ground in the Eastern Conference pecking order.
Mm-hmm. They're going to be a really, really interesting team. Is there anyone else that you have within that tier, or do you kind of cut it off?
You threw in Milwaukee in there, right, at the end, and like, I did want to kind of make the devil's advocate case here for Milwaukee, because everyone's out on Milwaukee in perpetuity. They're so dumb. They wave and stretch Dame and all this stuff. And like, to me, I see a team that has, the last 2 years they lost to Indy in the playoffs in the first round, and I think in both years that felt more damning to them as a team than it ended up being. Like, Indy was really, really good 2 years ago and made the conference finals. They were really good last year and made the finals. And is Milwaukee perfect? No, they're not. But they still have the Giannis of it all. And like, I think just because we've seen Milwaukee not get out of the first round against these teams that are clearly better, or look shaky against these teams, like, I'm sorry, I'm not picking the Pistons over Giannis in a first round series right now. I might pick the Hawks if everything is clicking, but like, neither of those teams are so impressive that I'm like, yeah, no, Giannis probably won't be able to get it done. Like, I don't know. Am I being too like Giannis pilled right now?
Dan, you go, and then I'll have my retort.
I think if anyone has them outside this tier where it's, they're going to be 8 or 9 or 10, I would get where you're coming from. But like, we just talked about secondary ball handling and creation with the Hawks, and the Bucks are just in a situation to where it's like, oh man, like, we need Kevin Porter Jr. to be so good still. That's not like the sturdiest position in which to be. And I think the Miles Turner pickup, it was actually probably good because unlike the Suns with Bradley Beal, you're trying to keep Giannis, not buy the right to trade Devin Booker in January instead of over the offseason, basically, which is what Phoenix did. So I think I'm probably a little higher on the Bucks than consensus, but I think that you might be on the more extreme end of optimism because Giannis is just a guy now surrounded by guys, many of whom have these question marks. What is Kyle Kuzma going to look like this season? Who is your second best offensive player, especially when you're going to look on the ball? They're not built to make in-season moves. This feels like they're just, what they were trying to do was remain semi-relevant, which I think they did, and then they can regroup next summer when they'll have 3 tradable first-round picks, and that's how you're pitching Giannis to stay. I just can't. I see the appeal of just, they have Giannis. I'd pick them to beat the Pistons or the Hawks, but there's just, outside of Giannis, there's just so many question marks here, and we've never seen an entire season of Giannis just being not only your best scorer / play finisher on offense, but does he need to be their best passer, just their best on-ball like facilitator overall in general? That's not something he's had to do for the best iterations of the Milwaukee Bucks.
Real quick before you retort, Justin, because I do think it's important that I contextualize, because I think I came a little hard. I'm not saying they should be in a tier with it. I think I agree with you in their spot in the tier. I just might make the case to put them in front of a Detroit, who I think is due for some regression. And then I'm going to yes and a little bit, and then Justin, I will let you yell at me. I promise. Are we really sure we like Giannis off ball that much? He doesn't really like setting screens. The best versions of these teams have been with him playing battering ram and then Chris Middleton hitting, running secondary stuff without him involved.
The only thing I'll say is that 2-man game with Chris Middleton, where he was off the ball, that was always really gnarly.
Really
and they never gave him, I guess, Dame. They didn't explore. They never seemed to explore that enough. Like, I need to see the numbers again on how many actions those two ran together. But he doesn't want to be that guy, though. That's a really great point, Carter.
I'm going to do something I almost never do, Carter. I'm going to be concise. Go look up a photo of the Milwaukee Bucks roster. Look it up on your phone. And then put your thumb over Giannis, and then look at the rest of the roster, and that's why I don't think that they are going to beat Detroit.
Would you put them in the same tier, real quick?
I think.
Would you put them with
below.
Atlanta and Detroit?
I think I would put them in a half tier below with Philly of maybe.
Yeah,
and Philly, I think actually, probably has a higher ceiling. Because if I put my thumb over one of those players, I think the rest of the roster
Philly
is a little bit
weird. Can we talk about Philly a little bit?
Are they're in a tier of their own, right?
Sure.
Below this,
I put the Bucks with them, but I think they're in a tier of their own.
So they have. This is the weirdest roster in the league by a mile. They have Maxey, McCain, Grimes, Edgecombe at the guard position, assuming Grimes comes back, and assuming McCain is the same, and all these players are kind of samey. They're all smaller guards that are not, especially Maxey and McCain. McCain was a big hit, but you don't really want to play 20 minutes a game with him and Maxey on the floor together.
Right.
Just two small framed guys that are just going to get pushed around and beat up. And then on the wing, it's really just Paul George and Oubre, that play the 3-4 kind of position. And then you have Embiid and, Andre Drummond. What is this roster? The best version of it, I see 6 or 7 guys who I think are pretty good at basketball here, but I don't think the fit's there. What do you think, Dan? If everything hits, does this team make sense?
Yeah, no, probably not. It's because everything hitting is, I just can't fathom. And I want to make clear, I hate saying this because he's one of the most dominant players of the era. What is the what percentage chance would you ascribe to Joel Embiid being 80% of Joel Embiid when next mid-April, early May rolls around? And I just don't know. If you tell me Embiid is Embiid, I think this roster makes a ton of sense then, because you've now scaled down what Maxey and Paul George need to do. I think they have a couple nice flyer guys when you're looking at Trendon Watford as a backup 4, maybe a hybrid 5, because the Andre Drummond is just bad now. Justin Edwards, he had some really good moments last year, just a 3-and-D wing guy. I actually really like VJ Edgecombe as someone who might be able to scale up a little defensively and play the wing minutes. But yeah,
he's 6'5". I thought he was 6'3". Sorry.
Yeah, so if Embiid is healthy, this team is going to be a contender or a fringe contender. I just don't know if you're asking me a confidence level on that happening. I don't know how you get to above a 3. And I think that's what makes it tough to think about what their fit is, because you have to get over the obstacle of, Joel Embiid will be there, which we just don't know.
In a weird way, they're too young.
Season stuff is encouraging there either, right? All you're kind of getting is negative reports about Embiid's health.
In a weird way, they're both too young and too old. There's not a healthy
wrong
shape
for sure.
Yeah, they're just you have the McCain, Edgecombe, even the Maxey kind of contingent, and then you've got the Paul George, Embiid timeline, and the Oubre. They're just all over the place. I actually might argue they don't make that much sense, even if everything clicks. They could talent their way, but I don't know if I see, Dan, a roster that, even if everything is hitting, where I go, that's more than the sum of their parts. The sum of their parts might be pretty good, but I just, that's always kind of the thing I'm over indexing on is what's the team that's going to be better than I think they should be? You know, I keep going to Tony Bradley playing NBA Finals minutes for the Indiana Pacers and it not being an abject disaster. Like, the alchemy matters at a certain point, but I'm not sure I see the alchemical mix for this Philly team.
I worry specifically about what their identity does look like should Joel Embiid be healthy, because part of the appeal of what Quentin Grimes did as an example last year was all that on-ball work, which in theory, if the Sixers are the best version of themselves, shouldn't be there. And then I also worry about them. You kind of hit this at the top, Carter. Positionally on defense, it feels like they're still too just beholden to Joel Embiid needs to be healthy and like the second or third best defensive player in the league, because
Which that doesn't feel
Maxey,
like it's happening again.
right. And just Maxey, McCain, Grimes, you're then very small if you want Grimes to play any moments at the three. I think Edgecombe can eventually get there, but like he needs to get stronger. He's a rookie. How much are you relying on him? Like Paul George and Justin Edwards are basically your wings. And how good do you feel about, what is Paul George, 35 now and just coming off knee surgery himself? How good do you feel about that? And so if you don't have Joel Embiid on the court, you might be able to figure it out, or I would argue you should be able to figure it out on offense. I don't know what you look like on defense at that point. So if he's playing, let's say 30 minutes a night, and that might be generous across what, let's say 42 appearances, that's a lot of defensive time that you need to make up without him. And I just don't know if they have the firepower to do it.
One last thing I'll say on the Sixers before Justin throws up because he hates this team. I felt like last year going into it, they didn't have enough guys who did the little things on their roster. You know, guys who are they had no Alex Caruso's on this roster, you know, and there's only one Alex Caruso, but not a lot of these connector type players who just make the right skip pass along the way, like up and down. Even if all these guys are playing at their best, Maxey wants to run, wants to have the ball in his hands. McCain wants to have the ball in his hands. Grimes needs to have the ball in his hands. Edgecombe's only ever played with the ball in his hands. Like, there's just not a lot of guys who just swing, or like make the right rotation, a half second early as opposed to right on time or a little bit late. And like, I don't see that on this roster still. So
I'm just shocked you don't like Kelly Oubre Jr. as a connective passer. That's honestly.
Hey, I
like Oubre. I don't like him in that role.
I would take Oubre on the Cavs, which would be a much, much smaller role. But Carter is right. I do feel like throwing up. We're trying to talk about relevant teams in the Eastern Conference, and we spent time talking about the Sixers. That's just.
I'm sorry.
That's poor work. Carter, it's fine. It's August. You still got a lot of time to get into regular season form. I will whip you into shape on this here podcast. Dan, of the teams we've discussed, who do you think is the most challenging matchup for the Cavs in a potential playoff series? Who do you think, if they're hitting their apex, if everything's clicking, would be the most difficult from a matchup standpoint?
I think, and it comes back to a discussion about why I'm higher on their ceiling against the Cavs than maybe in a vacuum, but Orlando, just when you look at the things they could do defensively, how big and physical they are, it's like they're Detroit on steroids, essentially. And now, like, you're just adding another elite shooter into the mix, so it gives them a better chance of hanging on offense. But the Cavs, when you look at some of their positional size and the way that some of their players have been banged up over the course of seasons, I do wonder if Orlando, should they be even close to full strength, can do a lot of things that would frustrate the Cavs and knock them out of their offensive element.
I totally agree with that. That would be my answer. I want to be on the other side of the bracket as them. Your scenario where you said the Cavs win 61, Knicks win 58, and Magic are right behind them. Fine with that. I am fine with them being on the other side of the bracket. Not because I don't want the Cavs to be challenged. It's just, I'm still scarred from playing against them, and Franz breaking Jared Allen's rib and things like that. Like, not that it was a dirty play or anything like that, but they
just hurt to play against.
Even if you make it through the series, you might not be able to make it through the following one. So I think that is the right answer. I think that they have that combination of an identity, the opportunity for a lot of internal growth, someone who I believe can be an all-NBA player in Paolo Banchero, kind of being that North Star for them. Like, they have that mix to be one of those teams that's really relevant. And, going back to kind of the Christmas Day conversation, I think if this exact roster was in a different market, I think there's actually a decent chance that they might have got that good of a showcase.
That's an interesting exercise. I think I would agree with. I mean, they are. Maybe they're not clearly the third best team in the East, but you could talk me into a scenario where they're just a better regular season team than the Knicks next year. Like you could do that pretty easily. I think you could convince me. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Like there's guys on the Knicks that either have missed time in the past or have played so many minutes that you wonder if they're going to miss time. And, they might even just be handled differently from an injury standpoint, right? Like you might get a few more rest days under Mike Brown. It will be interesting to see kind of what that changes. Now, the other question is, and I think this is a really important one. Obviously, our focus is going to be on the Eastern Conference because you don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse. I agree that the Cavs should be the favorite to come out of the East. I think they had a real good shot to do it last year, and we saw that didn't occur, so we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. But how do these top teams from the East compare to the West? Last year, the Cavs had the best winning percentage out of any team against the Western Conference. They had the second best net rating. But I think everybody would agree that the West, in terms of that tier 1 and tier 2 talent, it's so much deeper than the Eastern Conference. But does that tier 1 of the East belong, in comparison to tier 1 in the Western Conference?
That's where it would be a good discussion to split up tiers, because I think you can pretty easily make the case for the Cavs. Like, yeah, you can quibble over certain things, but I mean, like when you look at the Knicks' record against some of those West teams last year,
they were bad.
It was really bad. And
they
I
were
don't
bad
know
versus winning teams, period.
Right. And so I don't know that, like, I don't feel a lot better just because you have Mike Brown, Yabusele, and Jordan Clarkson on your roster. That's like not going to do it for me. So I think the Cavs certainly belong. You have questions against everyone versus the Thunder. And then there's a little bit of like Orlando stuff going on in Houston now, where I kind of wonder how the Cavs would match up with that team that's also really big, physical, and then it's also explosive at a bunch of their positions. But I think that if the Cavs when you're just looking on paper right now before seeing any of the games played, the Cavs might stand alone in the East when you're making comps to the West of which team in an NBA Finals matchup would you give the best chance to from the East. I don't know what the case would be for the Magic or the Hawks, the Knicks, or another one of these East teams.
I think that's fair. I think when you look at the Cavs on paper, when you look at what they accomplished in the regular season last year, absolutely. They are a bona fide contender. That is the best team in the Eastern Conference. But the thing is, we haven't seen them have that translate to the playoffs. We haven't seen them translate how great they are in the regular season to the playoffs. And we haven't seen them, to Carter's point, be more than the sum of their parts in the postseason. And I think that's going to be the question of this season is, do they have enough seasoning? Do they have enough experience? You talk about how growth isn't always linear. It's been so linear for the Cavs. They went from a play-in team to a first-round team to a second-round team, and then this was the first year where they didn't take a step forward. And obviously, there's a lot of context and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think that is why we're having conversations about, okay, maybe they are in a tier with the Knicks. Maybe these other teams can potentially, beat them in a series, is not because of what they are on paper. It's because there is still that vulnerability until they prove that they can be, what they need to be in the postseason.
Yeah, that's fair. And you mentioned what I think it's what's really tough for me, at least to wrap my head around with the Cavs, is there are so many legitimate excuses for why they have come up in these past few postseasons. And I just don't, it gets tough where it's okay, now we're dealing with the third straight one. How much value you're able to assign to that before you start wondering, is there something more deeper seated here that we need to take a look at? And this is kind of, they decided no. This offseason, there's not. I think that was the right call, as you could probably tell based off everything I've said. But this does feel like, which is weird to say about someone who's, to me, the clear-cut best team in the East, it's like a make or break moment for them.
100%.
Yeah, they need to prove that they are taken really, really seriously to be taken seriously as a contender. Like something I was thinking about at the very beginning of this podcast, Dan, is when you kind of said you had the Knicks in the same tier as the Cavs, and it was, like you kind of had to, and I thought if the Cavs had been the team to make the conference finals last year and the Knicks had lost in the second round, I kind of suspect we'd all have the Cavs as this standalone tier 1 team in the East. And I think to some extent we are maybe correctly dinging them for not showing the level of juice in the postseason that we've seen from them at points in the regular season. Like, this has not been a team that I've seen be playoff risers so far. Like they've won a couple series. One of those very, very dominant which, as Justin knows, I take issue with us just throwing out that Heat series though it didn't matter just because it was so dominant.
Here's my favorite thing, Carter, before you continue, because you're making a good point. It is funny that the Cavs had the best offensive rating in the playoffs last year by 7 points just because of that.
Of that Heat series. But like my general point is, I think like kind of what you're getting at, Dan, is a little bit of like that's why it's a make or break season for a team that is coming into the year as the favorite in the East, is because we haven't seen them just like put their foot on the necks of a pretty good opponent and dominate. Like the only time we've seen domination again is against Miami. So like I think they have a lot to prove that they can stay healthy, that when they're healthy they can show they can be great against other great teams in the playoffs, and they just haven't done it yet.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like the last 2 years with the injuries, I think the Knicks beat them fair and square straight up, right? Like Garland was healthy in that. Mitchell was healthy with the exception of, the broken finger on his left hand. But like that was just hey, they didn't have the supporting cast. They're playing a lot of Jetty Osman and Danny Green on one leg. And, Marcus Morris is out there. Like we just need to get a supporting cast in. Then they get a supporting cast that makes a lot of sense. And then they take these steps forward in the regular season. And then they haven't been healthy in the playoffs. So it'll be really interesting. Obviously, they'll be starting the season without Garland. We'll see, how they're able to manage the minutes. Lonzo Ball's health is a question. Larry Nance Jr.'s health is a question. So even the guys they're bringing in all come with those questions. But, we saw that even with Oklahoma City last year, right? Bringing in Caruso, bringing, Hardenstein that's missed some time at times as well. If you're healthy at the right time, sometimes that's all it is. And, there's always going to be some luck with every title run. But any parting thoughts, any wild, dark horse candidate in the East that you think can be up there, that can elevate themselves into any of these tiers? I kind of, and I know I'm wrong, but for some reason, I kind of like the Raptors just because I think that they have talent. I don't think that they can get into the mix with the Cavs. Carter, don't make that face when you talked about the Sixers for 20 minutes. But is there any team that kind of stands out to you that has, maybe a leap within them?
The Raptors are that team for me. I think that there's a lot of overthinking of kind of the one ball is the cliche that only has. They have all these guys that like to operate on ball. I think having those decision makers are valuable. And I look to how they've used RJ Barrett both on and away from the ball. Look at the passing leap he made last year when they're injured. Look at the way he's moved without the ball when he doesn't have it in Toronto. They can incorporate a lot of that stuff with Brandon Ingram, who has been at points more of a willing three-point shooter than people give him credit for. I'm still like the roster is, when you talk about rosters that might not make sense, like they have a bunch of these just like non-shooting 4s and 5s, and like losing Chris Boucher might actually be a pretty big deal for them because of that. But they have a lot of really good NBA players. And if Scotty Barnes takes a leap, and if you get healthy Emmanuel Quickley, who is one of the best off the ball and on the ball shooters in the NBA, you're talking about a team that I think could be higher up on the scale, like not they're into the Knicks, Cavs, Magic type tiers, but it wouldn't shock me if we turned around and saw the Raptors win like 44 games or something.
Hell yeah, buddy. You know what? I'm a Brandon Ingram believer. Everyone talks about him being a ball stopper. His best season came with Drew Holiday out there, Lonzo Ball, and Zion Williamson all being ball dominant, on ball guys. I think he can blend in there. I think they have some depth. It'll be interesting to see what they do, but I hate the Toronto Raptors. Like this is an instance of my basketball brain and my love of hoopers, like just kind of overriding the name on the front of the jersey. But I think that they could absolutely be in that mix. I would love to see them, kind of be neck and neck with like the Hawks, given how everybody loves Atlanta, and I just cannot stand them.
You're a broken man, Justin. It's okay.
I'm a broken man, but that's okay. That's why I bring in help. That's why I have you as my lovely co-host. That's why I bring in a tier 1 guest in Dan Favale. As I mentioned at the top of the podcast, make sure you guys are subscribing to Hardwood Knocks and checking out all of his work. Dan, let the people know what you got going on. Plug what you want to plug. What you got going on?
I'll just plug the Hardwood Knocks podcast. We have a lot of fun over there. We cover the entire NBA, and it's not just fake trades, shockingly enough. So if you have not checked us out, I would humbly request that you go check us out over there.
Oh yeah, as I said, one of my favorite national podcasts. I tend to avoid kind of the national like generalist podcasts, but I don't know how you do it. You go in depth on every single team. We brought up a bunch here. You had a lot to talk about, a lot to say, a lot of perspective on all these teams. We really, really appreciate you, and we really appreciate our listeners as well. Big thanks to all of you guys tuning in live on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chasetown's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of their view to chasetownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.